I think that is what has driven me towards the resistance, to say that I stood on the right side of history and I was able to make a difference. The reality is, I've always dreamt of the day that we will see a free Iran, but knowing that I might not be there to see it.
Right now, we're recording this conversation in the middle of a war. And I'm recording from Israel, where there's a real possibility that this conversation might be interrupted by an air raid siren. That's the reality of the days that we're living through. And in the middle of all this, you open the news and you hear the word Iran. But it's critical to make the distinction between the Iranian regime and the Iranian people. Today you're going to hear from Zolal Habibi, an Iranian-American activist who has dedicated her life to the Iranian resistance. Her father was executed by the Iranian regime in 1988. In Israel, we know something about courage, sacrifice, and the price that people pay for freedom. What you're about to hear is how the Iranian people today are fighting for the same freedoms, and what it means for them to shape their future for the people, by the people. Let's begin. Zolal Habibi, it is such a pleasure and honor to have you with us at You Are What You Give, especially during such, I would say, intense times as the days that we're living through today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Zolal. I understand that you really are out there making sure that your story is heard. We are in the throes of what might be a regime change in Iran. I'm speaking to you from Israel. I'm both American and Israeli. You're both American and Iranian. I want to understand how this story unfolds first and foremost from your personal experiences. Can you help us understand why you chose to become a pro-Iranian people, let's call it freedom fighter or resistance activist, whatever term you feel is most appropriate?
Well, I think that, unfortunately, I belong to the generation that I've never actually had the chance to be in Iran. My parents came to the US before the revolution, and but I became acquainted with the situation in Iran very early on, and I could literally say there hasn't been a day in my life that I haven't thought about the plight of the Iranian people, despite, the distance, geographically speaking. The reality is that, unfortunately, we have been faced with a very brutal dictatorship in Iran, a theocratic regime. From the onset, there has been a fight between the people of Iran and the current regime. And I think it's very important to differentiate the people from the regime. Iran is not its regime, it's the people, and they are very distant. And what's important is that the Iranian people have never given in to the status quo, and they have continued to stand and fight in face of the brutal regime that we have. The reality is that I think I got introduced to the human rights situation in Iran from very early on. I had vivid memories from when I was 4, meeting people who were victims of torture who had been able to escape Iran. I had that possibility to be able to meet them, learn about their story, and to understand that despite the fact that we were living in, a fairly comfortable life or in safety and freedom, people in Iran were denied those same basic rights. But I always thought that was, at a distance. But unfortunately, very early on, I came face to face with the realities of the regime. And that was that my father, who was a prominent writer and a human rights activist, was killed by the regime in the summer of 1988. That summer, the Iranian regime had over 30,000 political prisoners executed. And that was what it needed. Khomeini needed to be able to keep his regime afloat. Especially that was right after the end of the Iran-Iraq war, that for 8 years the regime had been able to suppress all forms of dissent by saying that there's, foreign enemy and whatnot. So that really changed my life, but not only my life, but I think it changed a lot in Iran's history. And with that, Khomeini was able to spread complete fear in society, and it took another decade for a major uprising to form in Iran, and that was in the summer of 1999. So yeah, that is the reason I decided to follow in the path of resistance. I remember the summer of, I mean, my activism, I think, began from, as a child, well, I was active with my parents, but, or growing up with the resistance, but, and as a teen and everything. But the turning point for me was in the summer of 1999 when the student uprising broke out. At that point, I had just graduated from high school and I was on my way to college and I had gotten a full scholarship and I was going to go and study medicine. Um, but seeing the scenes of the uprisings in Iran, and it was the first time that the world was seeing it because it was the start of cable news and CNN and whatnot. Seeing those scenes, I couldn't just be a bystander and watch from abroad. I um, I kept on thinking to myself, you know, my blood is not, you know, redder than theirs. I mean, we shouldn't have to live under such circumstances. And I decided to actually join the resistance.
Zolal, I think it's challenging just to hear that from the age of 4, you were exposed to such intensity. I understand that that coincides with the execution of your father. I can only imagine what that does to someone at that age. Perhaps I can't even imagine. I'll say in a completely different context, I'm here speaking to you from Israel. I hope that we're not going to be interrupted by an air raid siren. The war does persist here between Israel, US, and Iran, and that might happen, in which case we might have to just take a little break here. But we will do whatever we can to shelter our children from some of the tragedies that do occur. And yet there are those times that shelter just isn't going to work because it's just the reality of a given family and what they have to go through. So with those experiences and your decision to take to activism, I just wonder, what does success look like? What does a free Iran look like? And is that different than what, I don't know, the average American might imagine freedom in Iran to be?
I think that freedom is something that's universal. It doesn't matter where you're from or, what your origins. Every human being deserves to be able to live in a, in democracy and in freedom and to be given their God-given rights, really. And so I don't think it differs very much, but I think that the free Iran that we strive for and that we have, dedicated decades of our lives to, is pretty much outlined in the 10-point plan presented by Mrs. Rajavi. Maryam Rajavi is the president-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran for the interim government following the overthrow of the regime. She has outlined a 10-point plan, which is actually, I guess, kind of like the clip notes of the plan for the interim government, which has been, set forth by the National Council of Resistance of Iran. It calls for, people's sovereignty, that the ballot box is the, final criterion. It calls for separation of religion and state. It calls for, gender equality. It calls for, the rights of Iran's ethnicity to be respected. It calls for the abolition of the death penalty and all forms of torture and all the suppressive forces and entities that currently exist. It calls for an independent judiciary and the abolition of, the Sharia law in Iran. It calls for a non-nuclear Iran and an Iran that is in peace and in stability, a source of stability in the region, but also in peace with its neighbors and in the wider sense of it. So it calls for free market society. It really, it's 10 points, but it really gives you a clear outlook of what a free Iran could look like. And it actually puts in place a lot of guarantees that if one of them is missing, you're not going to be able to see that path towards a true democracy. So I think that in essence, it's many lawmakers have called it Jeffersonian, because it has that kind of a nature to it. But it is something that many Iranians agree to, and it is a source of unity and a unifying source, and sets the path forward to be able to move forward to a secular democratic republic in Iran. Today, the people of Iran are trying to make something clear. The reality, we oppose foreign intervention in our country because, unfortunately, democracy cannot be installed in any country. We think that true change will come about by the people of Iran, but unfortunately, till now, there has been a policy of appeasement toward the Iranian regime, and the people of Iran have paid the price, and they've been actually used as bargaining chips at the table of negotiation each and every time, and have been the main victims of this policy of appeasement. The reality is that we saw the people of Iran came to the streets bravely in just beginning of this year in January, and the final days of 2025. But they were met with brutal force. But today, I mean, the people of Iran, even despite that massive killing, they didn't give in. They didn't give up, and they were continuing their resistance in whatever forms that they could. Yes, there was martial law in Iran. Yes, there was, communication blackout for 19 days, which really set things off. But we just saw, like 5 days even before the start of the war, that 250 members of resistance units actually carried out a operation against the same location that was hit with Khamenei headquarters in Pastor, last Monday. And that is the reality of the people of Iran, that despite knowing the risk, that is the most secure location in all of Iran. And at a time that it was on heightened security, because there were talks of, negotiation and war might happen and whatnot. And that morning, actually, people were reporting that they were seeing, tanks on the streets, and like all the schools in that district were shut off and everything. They didn't know what was happening. They're like, is it because they're trying to prepare for the war, or what is it? But then they realized, no, there was a operation carried out by 250 members of the resistance unit, and they knew the risk, but they're willing to pay that price. I mean, we understand no one's going to get handless freedom in a silver platter. We're willing to pay that price ourselves, but independence is really key for the Iranian people. And the reality is that only the Iranian people have that legitimacy to bring about true change and decide on the future of Iran and to be able to take their destiny into their own hands.
Thank you for that, Zolal. I want to double kick on that for a second, because first of all, there's a lot of themes that you just touched upon, each of which I think are critical. Number one, a distinction that you made earlier was the distinction between the regime and the people. And I think people perhaps living in other places around the world don't understand how fundamental that distinction is. Looking on from Israel, we're actually very aware of that. When we look to take action against Iran, it's for our own self-interest, first and foremost, to be honest. We don't want to be nuked by Iran. And so we will do everything we need to defend ourselves. But in so doing, it's never been action against the Iranian people. It's always been action against the regime. And so without getting into, first of all, the history that you've just shared, I think is also critical. For me, one of the key points is what you mentioned, the 30,000 people, including your father, who were executed in 1988, which rings, eerily the echo of what we just saw a few weeks ago, with another 30,000, perhaps more, who were again murdered by the regime. And so, unfortunately, unless people take action, as you've just described, then we're going to be stuck. And so, on the one hand, you see U.S. and Israel have taken action against the leadership of the regime. And on the other hand, as you say, we have to make sure that the Iranian people are going to take charge of their own future. And I think that's the messaging that we're hearing both from Israel and from the United States. The question is, number one, where did they get the courage from? Who are those 250 people? I know that there's a blackout, and I know that they're not letting information travel, but are you in touch with people in Iran that are there on the ground? Can you tell us who are the 30,000 people who took to the streets and knew that there was a good chance? I mean, they were only some of the people, knew there was a good chance that when they left for those demonstrations, they were saying goodbye to their families for the last time. And indeed, that's what happened. Where do they muster the courage from?
I think that in Iran, the fight for freedom has been continuous, and this resistance has continued generation after generation and year after year. And that's very important to note. It's not something that has brewed overnight. This is something that has been in the making for decades. And 120,000 people have actually been executed for supporting the Iranian resistance. And that has been the price that the people of Iran have paid for to be able to reach the point that we are in today. The fact that the regime is in the position that it is today has been because of the fighting of the Iranian people to this point. And the reality is that, first of all, just to clarify, the actual numbers of how many people were killed in the protest is not verified. So there are very vast differences on the numbers that are being presented, but what is clear is that it's in the thousands of thousands. But some of the numbers they're not exact, and they do have unfortunately there are so many different sides who are trying to manipulate things. So it's really important not to just throw around numbers, especially because it's human life. But the reality is that the people of Iran have been fighting this regime from the onset, and they have been continuing. And in the last 12, 13 years, the Iranian resistance has had a strategy. It's called the strategy of resistance units, forming, groups, units on the ground who are local to, the situation. Some of them are as small as 2-3 people. Some are like 20 people, whatnot. And they are able to organize activities underground against the regime and carry out these activities. Just to give you a glimpse of what it is, like for instance, in 2024, they carried out over 39,000 activities in 1 year, and they targeted 3,000 centers of oppression. And that is what has kept the flame of resistance lit, and has given the message to people that you need to be on the offensive. We need to fight back. We need to never give in to this status quo. And that is what we saw on the street. Yes, as you said, many of those who took to the street, they knew the risk. They actually said their final farewell. They left even messages for their family and loved ones just in case they don't return, that there is something left. And so they understood the risk when they went to the streets, and they were willing to pay that price because they were at ease that there is a bright future ahead, that we can see a secular democratic republic in Iran. The reality is that this war that we are seeing, it didn't start because, unfortunately, these countries cared about the human rights of the people of Iran. It started because of their own interest, because of Iran's nuclear program and missile program. But the reality is, regime change is what the people of Iran want, but they want regime change by the people for the people of Iran. Because the reality is that, as I said, that's not the aim and the goal of these governments, is not the people of Iran. And so we need to be able to create that change that we want to see ourselves. And we don't want this revolution to be hijacked again. This has been a process. I mean, if you look in the last 10 years, in the last decade, there have been 4 major uprisings in Iran: 2017, 2019, 2022, and in 2026. And every time you could see if this evolved. The reality is that we have reached major turning points throughout the years, but each and every time, due to foreign intervention, actually, and due to the policy of appeasement, it has not been successful, and the people of Iran have just bared that price. And right now we are seeing, I mean, war is never the solution. Just look at what's happening right now. Well, Iran was hit. Iran is retaliating now. Countries in the region are being targeted. It had gone as far as Cyprus. Right now, the regime is speaking of trying to target Albania because that's where the Iranian resistance is based. Because the regime knows at the end of the day, they are the ones who will end its reign. It's going to be the Iranian people. It's going to be their organized resistance movement. And that is why the regime fears, the national council of resistance of Iran to such extent, and will go to whatever lengths to be able to counter it and to be able to have it eliminated. And unfortunately, a lot of governments in the process have done the regime's bidding in this regard, but they haven't been able to break the will of the Iranian people and the Iranian resistance. And we see that this fight is continuing and it's moving forward. And we hope that in these final chapters, that we will be able to bring about that change and to be able to truly turn, to really be able to, transfer sovereignty to the people of Iran and establish that democratic republic that the people of Iran deserve.
Well, thank you for that, Zolal. I think, we in Israel have been praying for the Iranian people to rise up and succeed for a long, long time. We're hopefully, we will have given a leg up by taking out some of the tyrants, quite a number of the tyrants, actually, in these last few days, even in the first 5 minutes of this event. But we are waiting for the Iranian people to pick up the pieces of the puzzle. And hopefully that will happen. Well, hopefully it will happen very, very swiftly. In the meantime, you've grown up in the United States and you've been in close solidarity with Iran and the Iranian people for a long time, most of your life. And as we heard earlier, what is it that someone who grows up other than yourself, perhaps your neighbors, people you know, your friends, in a comfortable democracy like the United States, and maybe don't really understand what you're fighting for? What is it that perhaps people don't fundamentally understand what it means to actually have the kind of courage, consistency that you spoke about before, that relentless push for basic human rights, that people who have those rights might not be able to understand what that's all about?
I think what's really important is to, first of all, not to take for granted the freedoms that you have and understand that, unfortunately, a lot of people are denied those basic rights. And then also see yourself as one of those who can be the part of the force for change, and to take on that responsibility, put that responsibility on your own shoulders instead of watching and seeing like if someone's going to do it for you. No one's going to do it for you. There's a saying in Farsi, we say no one's going to scratch your back except your own finger. And that is what's key. And that is, you can accomplish everything with the price that you're willing to pay for it and the sacrifice that it takes. So self-sacrifice has been very key. But I think for me, what puts things into perspective is, at the end of the day, why are we here on this earth? What is my responsibility towards mankind, towards humanity? Or what is the mark that I want to leave behind in history? I think these are key questions that, we should be asking ourselves and see if we have a response to it. And I think that is what has driven me to towards the resistance, to be able to say that I stood on the right side of history and I was able to make a difference. And the reality is, I've always, dreamt of the day that we will see a free Iran, but knowing that I might not be there to see it, the price might be that. That is something that I have accepted with open arms from the age of 18 from today. And I've had many role models. I've lost many of my friends in this path who've been killed by the regime. But we will continue, and we will never give in, and we will never give up until the dawn of freedom in Iran. Um, a, a Iran that could be truly serving its own people, not the interest of this or that government, or the interest of this or that tyrant. The people of Iran want to move forward, put behind them all forms of tyranny, be it turbaned or crowned. They want to be able to have, a true democracy and to be able to have, people's sovereignty. And I think we, in the 21st century, the people of Iran deserve that. And it's very sad that the country that the first human rights charter comes from is right now the country that has the most executions per capita in the world. We need to change that. And it's on us, the Iranian people, to do so, and we will do that.
So, Zolal, you come with a strong resolve. You've just said that you're willing to give, I understand, your life for this cause. What can people do? You're in the United States or elsewhere around the world as you travel to champion this cause. The people who are listening to this and watching this are most likely not in Iran because of the internet blackouts, et cetera, et cetera. You're not speaking directly to them. You're speaking to a broader audience. The words that you just said, speaking about life purpose and legacy, being on the right side of history, that is fully in line with everything we speak about on every episode of You Are What You Give. My question to you, though, is what can be done? How can people get involved, do something of material significance for this cause?
I think there's a lot that people can do. I mean, for those who are in the US, you could reach out to the Organization of Iranian-American Communities. It's oiac.org. And they have chapters across 40 states, so you're most likely covered. And they have a lot of activity that you can help out with. You can contact your lawmakers, share with them the message of the Iranian people that the solution to Iran is neither war nor appeasement, supporting the Iranian people and their resistance for change. And the final, outcome is neither choosing between the current theocracy and the previous monarchy. It's moving forward to a secular democratic republic in Iran, and share that message, because that is what the people of Iran are, yearning for, and that's the message that they want to be able to give. And also, try to raise awareness, learn more. You can visit, to learn more about the resistance, you can visit ncr-iran.org or maranajariforchange.com. And I think growing our knowledge base can really put things into perspective and can be helpful. And as always, for those who would like to help, there's many different ways that you can help. So just reach out to any of those organizations or iranfreedom.org, and they would be more than happy to accommodate that and let you know what it is that is needed due to the current circumstances.
Well, thank you for that, Zolal. I think that information is always critical. It's definitely a first starting point. I think you've already shedded a lot of light onto a better understanding and appreciation of some of the dynamics at play here. I do want to circle back towards the closing of this conversation to something that we began with earlier, which is your personal experiences. You are a woman, and you are part of this leadership in this movement. And you've mentioned other women and their roles. Is there a special place for women's leadership in this process, or is that just incidental and the men and women are playing sort of an equal role? And because we're talking about a free democracy, that would kind of be the norm?
Well, actually, the Iranian resistance has always placed an emphasis on women in leadership and equality within its ranks. And in fact, I could say more equity than equality, because I think that in our movements, especially because we are faced with a misogynist regime like the Mullahs, it has been very important to understand the price that women have paid in this fight, in the forefront of this fight. And the reality is that because of the suppression that they faced, because of all of the, obstacles that they faced to join even the ranks of the movement, the reality is that in society, there's unfortunately, we live in a male-dominant society around the world. I don't think there's any exception to that right now at this point. But women have been suppressed so systematically for so many centuries that it's like a spring. The more pressure that you put on it, when you take away that pressure, the more potential it has to jump. And that is what we have seen. Mrs. Bajavi has actually led this journey in this movement for 40 years now. And what she did is, she's not an exception to the rule. What she has done is create a whole line of competent, capable female leaders in this resistance. And she truly believes that women are the force for change. And the reality is that when women take leadership roles and when they are empowered, this isn't just, allowing women to take their place in society, but it's also, breaks off a lot of the shackles that are really pulling everyone back, both men and women. So it's in the path of emancipation of human beings. And this is one of the core principles of this movement. I mean, if you look at the MEK, the entire leadership council of the MEK are women. If you look at the NCRI, 52% of the NCRI are women. And women, you see them in the forefront in the fight against this regime too, in the streets of Tehran, across Iran. And so women are truly the force for change. And this is something that I remember I was 15, I think, when I heard a speech from Mrs. Bajavi in London, and where she directly targeted Khomeini and said, you will be overthrown by the same force that you can't even take into consideration, and that is the women of Iran. And we see the role of the women of Iran today.
That is powerful. Zolal, I have one closing question for you. As you described earlier, we're in an interim situation right now. This is not the end of this chapter. This chapter of Iranian history has only begun to be written. And I wonder what happens at the close of this chapter being written, when we're on the other side of this, when there's a new government, a new makeup of Iranian society in terms of governance. What do you think that your father of blessed memory would be thinking or saying to himself as he looks at your actions and what the Iranian people have succeeded, hopefully, in doing?
Well, I think what that free Iran would look like is actually just to explain what it is that we're aiming for. Is after the overthrow of the regime, there will be a provisional government for 6 months. And then there will be elections to be able to put together, through popular votes of every single person in Iran, a constitutional assembly that will be responsible to create the new constitution for Iran. And then there will be free election. And first of all, that constitution will be put up for votes by the people of Iran, and then there will be free elections. So that is the path that we're going in. What I have thought about, what my dad would say that day. In fact, I remember dreaming of that, like when I was trying to make that decision, and my dad, like, his message to me was like, "You've grown up and made me proud." But I think that the day that we do see the dawn of freedom in Iran, we will see how all of those who have sacrificed their lives for freedom in Iran, they still live on in that hope, in that dream, and that message, and those values, and those principles. I think that one of the things that this movement has been able to do, which is unprecedented, I think, in history, is that they have turned their principles and values into policy. In a world that politics is known to be, dirty and all of that, you see people who stand by their principles and pay the price for it and their values. And I think that is something that's very valuable. And I am immensely um, indebted to the fact that I actually have that possibility and that privilege to be a part of that movement. And I hope that it sets the precedent for others to be able to, move forward with our principles, with our values, instead of, thinking of interest or whatnot. So hopefully we could set that precedent for others. But I think that that day we will have with us all of those who have lost their lives for the cause of freedom. And they will live on in that dream of a free Iran and how it flourishes.
Zolal, thank you for the clarity of your vision. I understand it's not yours alone. You are a spokesperson for so many others. And you're not only a spokesperson. Oh, that's my siren. I'm going to have to close my closing. Zolal, you and I will be in touch. I will close this episode at another point. Thank you for your time, and we should all be safe. I'm back, and I apologize to Zolal offline for the abrupt interruption. And of course, I thanked her for her open conversation about commitment, courage, and hope. But the air raid siren was an important reminder that these conversations about better giving aren't just theory. They're all about real life. What Zolal made clear to us in our conversation was that the Iranian people do not want war, they do not want appeasement, and they do not want their revolution to be hijacked. So here's this week's Giving Challenge. Before forming a loud opinion about a struggle that isn't yours, ask, whose lives are actually at stake and who should lead towards their future? In the case of Iran, choose one of the following. Learn the difference between the regime and the Iranian people. Support organizations that advance a promising future. Or have one conversation where you replace your certainty with humility. Better giving isn't just generosity. It's knowing how to listen, knowing when to step forward, and sometimes when to take a step back. Thank you for joining us for the journey, and thank you to Victoria Hurst for supporting this podcast. Keep doing better. You are what you give.